ChatGPT has been very useful to me over the last couple of days. And so around June 28th or 29th, I was making some code edits to this project that I'm working on, right? I call it Gaucher RSS Reader Microsoft WPF. It's basically the Windows version of the RSS reader that I've been working on for quite some time. And so I was making a Windows version and I wanted to convert the data from one format to another, right? From RSS format to SQLite. So I'm working on that and I ran into a bit of a roadblock, right? So many of the RSS feeds that I work with, they're in RSS or Atom format, but one particular feed happened to be in RDF format. So when it came to parsing this RSS feed through the syndication API in the Microsoft .NET framework, the syndication API was unable to handle this data. So I needed to resort to alternative means. I went through various frameworks and APIs, right, very quickly before I found a fit that matched my requirements. So I said, okay, this will be a great opportunity to use ChatGPT to examine the data and create an appropriate solution. So I went through the different solutions that I thought would, um, you know, that I would appreciate, right? And so my first attempt was to use XSLT, right? So I wanted to use XSLT style sheets, and then um, after that, I decided, well, maybe I'll try a RDF framework, right? And then I said, okay, actually, I want to use XML document. So the reason I chose XML document was because those previous options that I mentioned, they didn't actually work in practice. So there were issues, there were actual issues with those particular alternatives. And so I decided to go with XML document. So XML document is going to allow me to load any XML document that's a well-formed document or otherwise, and allow me to progress through that. So ChatGPT was ideal for all of these use cases because it allowed me to quickly iterate through the different options to figure out what it was that I wanted. So this is the first conversation that I had with ChatGPT, and I had already went through Google to look at different solutions and implement them. And in this case, I wanted to use C# and .NET to load an XSL style sheet and translate the RDF document that I was getting over the internet, which I had encoded as a file. And so the last time that I had wrote code like this with XSL was about, I think the year 2020, or no, I'm sorry, year 2000. Yeah, the year 2000, year 2001, somewhere in that ballpark. So I used XSL extensively back then and knew everything about XSL at that time and XPath and XQuery and all of that. So I said, hey, this will be a great idea to use. This will be a great opportunity to use XSL. Say that 3 times fast. Somebody say it 3 times fast. XSLT, XSLT, XSLT. And so I went through the Microsoft documentation for XSL and said, okay, I'd like to speed up the process of implementing this, and let's use ChatGPT to do that. And so I went through the documentation to make sure I was familiar with XSLT transforms, and I used some Google searches and Stack Overflow just to get a broader context and to what do you call that? Jog your memory. Yes, so to get my memory going again on how XSL works. So I said, okay, I got the overall gist of this, and I now have the information I need to ask GPT particular questions that will produce the needed result. So I went through and I posed some questions to ChatGPT, the form, okay, implement this particular style sheet. Um, Actually, create me an XSL style sheet, first of all, right? And there are examples on the internet of style sheets that are ready to go that will convert from RDF to RSS, right? And I tried those and they didn't work. They didn't work adequately. There's an issue with namespaces with RDF and XML parsing in .NET. So, um, but I'm getting ahead of myself on that. But that was the main issue here. So in this conversation, ChatGPT did a very good job based on my questions that I posed to it and the data format examples I gave it, um, and giving me not only an XSL output that I could use and write as a file, an XSLT file, that I then put into Visual Studio, but also the corresponding C sharp code that would load that XSLT style sheet and convert it to a data format and to an object format, right? So that's what we have here, or at least that's what I show here. But I decided I wanted to move on to a different solution. Now, ChatGPT did suggest things like the RDF reader that you can get through NuGet. It also recommended Argotic. Well, actually, it did not recommend Argotic. I got that from a search query on Google, but then it knew how to basically work with that. So here I am taking ChatGPT and I'm saying, hey, take this XML structure that I have here and create the corresponding C sharp object or class definition, right? That I could then use to deserialize a XML data file into this object format, right? And ChatGPT did a fabulous job in putting that together, right? And ultimately, there was an issue with namespaces, right? So and this conversation is happening over several days, right? I work with it a little bit, then I take a break and I come back because most of this I'm doing late at night, and I didn't want to work past 10 p.m. or midnight, right? Because sleep, it's important to get your sleep. So anyway, on the final day, which was yesterday, I had a very good session. I had a breakthrough. So that's the main thing I want to talk about now is this breakthrough that I had, right? So I had an absolutely fabulous breakthrough with ChatGPT. I started the conversation with talking to ChatGPT about the software development lifecycle, the SDLC, because ChatGPT is a language model and it needs context, it needs information. And with this conversation, I wanted to make sure everything was aligned with ChatGPT and my 25 years of understanding of software development, its understanding of software development process, and setting the stage for a quality conversation rather than one that was utilitarian. Because I think some of the issues I've had over the last few days using ChatGPT to accelerate what I was trying to do was based on, you know, a utilitarian interaction rather than one that was qualitative. So here we walk through the different parts of the software development lifecycle, and then I set up questions for ChatGPT that are not actionable but are more contextual. So I said to ChatGPT, basically, I have this data file and it is in a particular format, and I'd like your assistance in translating that. And I want to give you an example of that file, right? And so I couldn't give it the entire file because that file would be voluminous or it'd be rather large. So I gave it a shorter, truncated version that illuminated the structure. And in this case, it did an extremely great job. And I stress extremely great. It did a very great job, nearly perfect job, giving me the corresponding object or class definitions that I can then plug into Visual Studio, right? So that saved time there because that's my overall objective. I could write all of this myself, right? But it would take me many days, right, in some cases. And I know ChatGPT can do things in like a few seconds. So, so then I wanted it to take the um, RDF file and use XML document, the XML document object or class from the .NET framework, and convert that RDF format into into an object instance of those classes, right? And then it did a pretty good job with that, but I knew from experience that there would be certain aspects of parsing that XML in .NET and C Sharp that could cause issues if you didn't approach it a certain way. And so I gave ChatGPT a suggestion. I gave it a suggestion. And it basically did a pretty decent job. Let's stress the word decent in taking that suggestion into account, which was to process the XML nodes based on the unqualified name, right? And do so in a more procedural fashion where you have more of an opportunity for error handling. So it did incorporate that suggestion, right? It just didn't incorporate it in a way that would um, substantially give control to the programmer over the the uh, the twists and turns that can occur when processing the XML. So I changed the subject and I had it generate code that would use the RDF loader class that it generated, right? And then I had it generate a mapping between the Microsoft Syndication Feed API and this RDF loader and the RDF document object that was generated. So good. So far, so good, right? So there are some issues with the code it generated, right? Especially this add method. That doesn't work, right? And so when you read the actual API documentation, it basically clarifies how you're supposed to set up syndication item instances, in this case, into a syndication item collection. But I would come back to that because that was a small issue that I could address myself. But when I came back to correcting the overall code that loads the XML into this object model, right? I needed ChatGPT to work with me because I had set much tougher constraints on the Visual Studio project so that the code is more robust. And I needed ChatGPT to generate code that didn't assume the default settings of Visual Studio where things were a little bit more lax, right? My settings are a little more strict. So it responded somewhat okay, right? You know, I'm being polite in that, but I saw code patterns where it was trying to. So I just said, okay, perhaps I would give it more specific error messages, error codes, right? And perhaps there's some wiring in there with Microsoft who acquired ChatGPT and Visual Studio and the knowledge base about that, that would allow it to use a more advanced process to figure that out. Such a thing didn't exist. So that was fine. I got the message there, and I decided to take a different tact. This is a large language model, so perhaps I can teach it in real time, right? So I said, let me write some example code that illustrates where I think it should go, or at least a direction it should go, that would be more productive in terms of code that will compile successfully in Visual Studio and code that will avoid various issues, as I alluded to earlier, right? So I gave it a code snippet and I presented it to ChatGPT, and I spoke to it in a way as you would speak with another person, right? Using tact, diplomacy, that sort of thing, because there are certain ways that they've programmed ChatGPT to understand emotion, to understand, verbiage, and so I said, okay, let's use that type of phrasing to make progress in this dialogue. So ChatGPT did respond in a pretty decent way. Notice my use of the word decent, right? Um, so what I realized is that it can be taught. So, but I needed the entire module to be in that structure that I presented to ChatGPT. And I realized it needed a little bit more information and a little bit more context. And so that's what I did. Because if I'm going to rewrite the whole thing, then I don't really need to use ChatGPT. But ChatGPT can rewrite all of this faster than I will, right? And so if I can give it the right prompting and the right information, then I basically will achieve my automation objectives. So I had a dialogue with ChatGPT here, right, to set up the context, to set the stage, right? And then what I wanted to do was give it a really good quality code snippet that was more substantial and that incorporated all the elements of our conversation, right? And I didn't go too far with that. I left some of it in the form that ChatGPT had presented to me, but I went a lot further here with this particular structure because this is actually how I would like the code to be written ultimately. Okay, so I gave that to ChatGPT, and then I gave it a very special prompting. I call this the innovation prompt, right? Okay, so um, I said, and this is what you see down at the bottom. I asked ChatGPT, let's make a version of this. And the keyword was merge. That merge my approach and your approach, right? That will then create a ultimate solution, right? The keyword was merge, right? Because I didn't want ChatGPT to just be like uh, a parrot that's just, the bird, the parrot, it just imitates whatever you say. I didn't want ChatGPT to do that. I wanted it to actually use that language model and combine and unify what I was hinting at and what I was implying, right? But also what it's able to understand and compose in that language and in that intellectual thought process, right? Okay, that artificial intellectual thought process. And what I got as a result was absolutely fabulous, in my estimation, with a tool like this, right? And so it literally took that suggestion and it applied it through the entire class definition, right? And so I was impressed at this point. I was like, yeah, this is really top stuff right here. So that last function here or method, parse item, ChatGPT substantially deviated from what it had presented to me in the previously, right, in the past, right. It took my suggestion, and it encoded that, and that was remarkable, right. But I'm going to keep it a buck with ChatGPT because when you keep it a buck with this language model, it's going to adapt appropriately, right? And so I told it about some of the results of this, right, just for its own knowledge in the future. And so, and basically it all worked out. So, um, artificial intelligence isn't going to take over the world, and it's going to require a well-informed person, human, to drive it, right? And the more you know and the more experience you have, right, the uh, more capable this tool will be in your hands. So one need not worry about the future of artificial intelligence and humanity. Um, it really comes down to the humans that use this and put it into practice. So I was able to take this result, and ChatGPT achieve what I had hoped it would, which was an acceleration of this process for me. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found this informative. And I will continue to use ChatGPT to move forward this project that I am talking about in these other videos about WPF and SQLite, now that I see how I can better put it into practice. And I foresee myself being able to use ChatGPT to accelerate my software development in the future and to achieve remarkable things. So I continued the process with ChatGPT to inform it about what I did. And again, I wanted to bring this language model up to date, at least in the context of the conversations I will have with it in the future. And so it was a remarkably successful endeavor from my point of view. And I see a very bright future with this type of automation. And so, um, and I know I'm saying this again, but um, based on what I see, no one needs to be concerned about ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, at least at this stage, from what I see, as there are very good utility and application of this tool set.